It was pallets and pallets of product that were stacked in a corner with the label destroy marked on it. And when I inquired, just out of curiosity and inquisitiveness, what that was, I very quickly learned that that was excess inventory and customer returns that was destined for the landfill. How do I increase margin here? How do I increase gross margin? How do I bring down CAC? How do I bring down marketing spend? How do I increase organic marketing? What's top line this month and this quarter? But also importantly, what's bottom line? At what point am I break even? At what point am I profitable? If you can't answer those questions confidently, I think you're in trouble.
Welcome to the DTC Insider podcast, where online business owners come to find actionable tips and tactics to grow their businesses. Now, here's your host, Brian Roisentul.
Welcome to another episode of the DTC Insider podcast. My name is Brian Roisentul. I'm your host, and today I'm super excited to interview Shraysi Tandon. She is the founder and CEO of Kidsy, and she has a very, very interesting story. No pressure, of course. Hey, Shraysi, thanks for being on the pod.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Great to be here.
My pleasure. So why don't you start by telling the audience about your background? Because you started as you're a former business journalist, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. My path to becoming a startup CEO and founder is very nonlinear. I don't come from an Ivy League background. I have no computer science or engineering degree. Never did the standard, whether it was consulting or investment banking or sort of tech building that you typically see in a lot of founders. But I started as a business journalist. It was something that I always wanted to do and become ever since I was 14 years old. I went on and I studied journalism and political science, thinking I wanted to become a political reporter, but ended up sort of learning a lot about business, economics, and finance, and saw how that really moved the world in such significant and impactful ways, and how it also aligned with everyday decision making that people were contemplating in their lives. And spent, I think, almost a decade as a business reporter at some of the largest news networks across the world.
And did you interview someone we know?
And many people we know. I think I've interviewed at this count close to 700 people during my time as a journalist, and then subsequently as a documentary filmmaker. I was able to leverage a lot of the journalism skills into filmmaking, directed and produced a feature documentary, which also entailed a lot of interviewing. And it's funny, during that time, I didn't realize this, but the lessons and all the skills I acquired as a journalist and a storyteller have really been the foundation of the work I'm doing today as an entrepreneur and as a CEO.
Why is that?
Well, I think so much of building a company, and I think so much of running a startup, boils down to one of the most important skill sets, which is storytelling. When I think about it, and I think about sort of the CEO hat, every day you are storytelling. You're talking about your company, you're talking to customers, you are using storytelling in hiring. In order to really hire and attract the best talent, you need to convey to them the mission of what you're building today, and then the vision of what this is going to be tomorrow. And Kidsy is a venture-backed startup, and I see so much of that storytelling also play out in investor meetings and investor calls, where again, it sort of all boils down to how well do you tell this story and sort of sell the vision for this company. And then internally as well, communication is something we're extremely good at and strong at as a team. Our internal comms is something I really pride myself on, and it all comes down back to that storytelling nugget.
Oh, I can see it now. Thank you. What was that the most interesting interview that you have done that you remember?
So many. And I think there were so many people that I've interviewed over the course of my career, whether it was the most powerful, wealthiest, most influential humans, down to even people such as child laborers and folks that were enslaved or, part of victims of human rights abuses. I think if we're talking about perhaps a really well-known figure The one that really stands out to me is the president of Israel, Shimon Peres. I had interviewed him a couple of years ago in Davos, Switzerland, on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum. And I just remember walking into this room with a man that was extremely powerful. He had spent about 20 years at the top of politics in Israel, first as a prime minister and then as a president. And his humility, his warmth, he was essentially a peacemaker. He had always tried to strike peace talks between Israel and Gaza for a very long time. And it was sort of the time that I spent with him before the interview, during, and then subsequently after. A few days after my interview with him, I also had Shabbos dinner with him that I was invited to a private event and got to spend some time with him as well. And you really see the person behind the power. And that to me always remained such a memorable moment in my career.
That's powerful. I mean, I know nothing about journalism, but you know that we all leverage something from our, let's say, education, careers, and we bring that into whatever we build next, right? And that gives us a unique edge, let's say, if we use it well. Besides what you said about storytelling, which is true, correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I know nothing about that, but I guess that it gives you many other, let's say, levers that you can pull, such as, doing research, being informed, and then reading, like in between lines, because when you are a journalist or a business journalist, even more, you need to do your homework, before you interview someone. You need to, where the conversation happens, the media says something, but you really know the conversation goes one level below the surface, right? So do you think that helped too? Or that helps?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, so much of the journalism side you see, at least for my career, which is so visible because I was a television news reporter, is the interview piece. But there's also so many stories that we're reporting on that are very sensitive, very serious. You're in a very high stakes environment. The stakes are high because if you get it wrong, there could be many legal implications that happen as a result of the mistakes. And the penalties are swift and severe. And there's also this cancel culture that's always at play if you were to have a misstep or a misspoken sentence. And I think being really careful and thoughtful and exacting with what it is that you are presenting to the world and your ability to communicate on a facts only basis is something that you hone very quickly as a journalist. And that's really helped me really well in my career today as a founder. And then beyond that, to your point about being extremely investigative and thorough and taking a deep dive and peeling the layers, every decision I make today at Kidsy is so data driven and informed. I mean, I could probably put out research papers and thesis on the why of everything that I do and why now and why today. And, is the arc of history bending in my favor? And is it propelling this company forward? And what are the tailwinds and all the historical data points that are leading me to the decisions I'm making today, but that will also serve me in the future? And I think a lot of that investigative piece that I've really done my entire career has served me so well. So I think in many ways it is a superpower to come from this sort of non-linear journalism investigative background.
How do we connect these dots, journalism and Kidsy?
Great question. So one of the things that you get exposed to as a journalist is you get to have a front row seat to many historical moments and developments that happen in real time. But particularly as it relates to Kidsy, it was during my time I was directing my feature documentary Invisible Hands, which focused on child labor and child trafficking within global supply chains. So I spent essentially 4 years of my life doing an investigative deep dive in supply chains all over the world. We shot the film in 6 countries, including the United States. So I spent many weeks and many months traveling to agricultural farms, warehouses, factories, construction sites, mines. And in one of my visits, I had signed an NDA and walked into a warehouse where we were really exploring their labor forces and their supply chain. And it was during that time when my eye sort of caught my eye to the corner of the warehouse. It was pallets and pallets of product that were stacked in a corner with the label destroy marked on it. And when I inquired, just out of curiosity and inquisitiveness, what that was, I very quickly learned that that was excess inventory and customer returns that was destined for the landfill. and it was brand new product. And that's where I sort of got my first front row seat to what that entailed. I walked away and I spent a lot of time researching it because I couldn't get this image out of my mind. I thought I was fairly well read and well informed as a person, but you learn something new every day. And that was certainly one of those moments. And at that time, I learned that returns in the United States was a $500-600 billion crisis, which is the total retail value of all the products that are returned in the US at the time. Today, that number is closer to $1 trillion. It hit almost $1 trillion in January of this year. Fast forward a year later, I was pregnant with my first daughter, and I decided to be a really smart consumer. And I thought, well, instead of buying all of these items that I need to acquire for my child at full price, why don't I try to secure an open box, excess inventory, customer returned, overstocked item? So I started making some phone calls, and I called a warehouse and I said, do you have any strollers that are excess inventory or customer returns? And the manager said, yes, I do. And I said, well, can I buy one? He said, well, I can't sell you the one, but you can buy the 100 or 200 that I have available. That moment and that phone call was sort of the very early innings of the wheels of Kidsy turning in my brain.
I can only imagine like the meme, going boom in your brain when you heard that. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how life puts us in a position. I mean, one thing that I think, talking about myself, I lost when I started working, let's say remote, the pandemic, etc. I love working from home. We have a remote team. I love the culture we have built. But being in the field, connecting with other people, not only like you can connect with people everywhere, but work related seeing things, what you have experienced couldn't have happened, if you hadn't gone to the place, that you needed to do the research at, right? So that's what I think we are missing on these days. We don't see what we cannot see from our homes, right?
Absolutely. I agree. And I'm with you. I think the pandemic and the work from home culture that spurred after the pandemic certainly created so many wonderful pockets of opportunity. And it really democratized hiring in a way, because so many times you were confined to the state or the city, or even a 5 or 6 mile radius where your office was located for your hiring purposes. And I think the democratization of being able to access talent from not just anywhere in the country, but really anywhere in the world, and it having been okay, and all these productivity tools and work from home tools that enabled this entire movement to happen has certainly had its pluses. But I'm a huge lover and believer of in person. And as I continue to grow and scale Kidsy, we have a remote team. I often think about how can I hire as many people as possible. I'm based in Chicago, within the Chicago ecosystem, because to your point, the level of information and knowledge sharing and exchange that happens in person in real time is simply non-existent in a remote environment. And then there's also something to be said about the serendipity and those moments of alchemy that get created, where life or something serendipitously happens that you otherwise would not have known about or learned about if it was not happening in person in real time.
Really agree. So you got off that phone call. What happened next?
I quickly called some of my friends and family members, cousins, relatives who were parents, and I started asking them if they would ever buy something that was excess inventory or customer return. And these are people who had had kids, and I was pregnant at the time. So I was yet to go on this like explosive journey of being a parent, but I was on the cusp of it. And I really wanted to understand what the demand side looked like and what the customer quote unquote sentiment was around this feeling. And when I shared with them the prices and the access they would have, I could just sense the level of excitement and this resounding yes that happened. I mean, guaranteed it was probably a poll of like 7 or 8 people at the time. But it's all about looking for those early signals that you need. And I think there's a little bit of also like suspension of disbelief. Like you think that 7 people is all you need to convince yourself that this is a great idea, as opposed to the hundreds of thousands of customers you will then go on to serve. but it's looking for those early signals. So I think I just wanted to get some validation from my own network of whether or not this is something they would buy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that makes sense. It's a double-edged sword. I've discussed, go-to-market strategies with many amazing founders on this pod, and, two things they say, on one hand, validating things with friends and family or your network is great because you don't need to go to strangers and it's fastest, cheaper to get validation from them. But on the other side, depending on who you ask, they'll tell you what you want to hear, right? So how did you deal with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've guinea pigged my entire network of friends and family so many times. They're probably sick of me. I've guinea pigged them for interviews, for stories, for even my film, and even in the naming of Kidsy, it's always relying on my network and getting them involved in the process and hearing from them first, because you don't have a customer yet. So you just make up these pseudo potential customers and then you try to get really quick responses from them. But really, for me, the early days was just trying to validate both the market, the supply side. How healthy is the supply? How big is the TAM? At the time, I wasn't even thinking of TAM. I just wanted to see how big was the market and what was the potential. Is the market growing? Is it shrinking? What are the headwinds? What are the tailwinds? What's happening economically across the country? What's happening on a consumer sentiment level? What's happening on a micro and macro level? And then what's happening politically? Like, are there going to be any political headwinds? Like, for example, if this was an infant formula company, it is very politically charged. And you have to play nice with so many political bodies in order to make that happen. So I just wanted to get the full lay of the land on the supply side. And then later on the demand side as well. How do people feel about this? Is there a level of educating that needs to happen as we do something that's quite disruptive? And then to your point, it goes back to that journalism, the investigation, the data-driven, building a thesis
Yeah,
around
I
it.
was going to say something like that, that was the journalist talking, like probably another founder, couldn't have said, something about politics or anything like that when, launching their products. And it's because you're a great
Mm.
background in journalism. So then you launched, your company, you launched Kidsy, and well, yeah, I understand that the first 6 months were wild, right? So could you please explain
Yeah, it
what
was
happened?
wild then, wild
I'm
now.
sorry. Yeah.
Yes, it was wild then, it was wild now. So we launched, we were in semi-stealth or beta for about, I would say, 6, 7 months in early 2023, just doing very small invite-only experiences on our platform. And we came out of beta and launched in September of 2023. So we're less than 2 years old. And within the first 6.5 months of Kidsy, we accrued $1 million in sales, which if you actually look at like pre-pandemic levels, like hitting the $1 million revenue mark at that point was a Series A company. So we were doing Series A numbers, for through standards 6 months into launching the business, and it hasn't slowed down since. The growth has been explosive, and it partly was surprising to me, but also not surprising because I had seen the data, I had seen the numbers, I had ran, to whatever point I could stress test the supply side and stress test the demand side. I had run those configurations already. So I knew what was happening to us was almost inevitable. And I think this is what happens when you put a product out into the market that has a huge demand side, a huge supply side, and a very acute pain point that you're solving for people in real time.
2023 wasn't an easy year. Exactly. Right. It was tough. It wasn't, 2020, 2021. I think that, well, 2022 wasn't easy either. There were like a lot of layoff in 2022, 2023. Really, really wasn't easy. I remember it was a year because we do a recap from time to time with multiple guests here about the evolution of e-commerce in the last years before pandemic and after pandemic. And 2023, if I recall correctly, was the year that, brands started to realize that there was something called profitability and bottom line, and top line revenue wasn't just enough. It sounds silly to think about it now, but it was a serious conversation back then. Everyone, like, money was cheap, and everyone was selling. So top line revenue was the name of the game, but then it wasn't. Yeah. So I think that it wasn't pre-pandemic standard, as you said, but it was very, very tough. It wasn't $1 million in 2020 that it was, let's say, easier.
Mm. Yes. And that to me has always blown my mind. Like, I've covered the tech space during my time as a business reporter, and I could never understand. And I know, the term blitz scaling was coined by Reid Hoffman. And that's what a lot of companies were doing. In order to be venture backed, you had to have this absolutely insane growth that's solely focused on top line revenue. But I think that is so broken from just pure business fundamentals. And again, having come from a business journalism background and having looked at and studied businesses, not just private companies, but also looking at the P&L and balance sheets of public companies, it gets very ingrained to you early on the importance of looking at not just top line, but also bottom line growth. So for us at Kidsy, I mean, the North Star from day one is top line growth needs to be really healthy. But at the same time, you cannot be scaling on unit economics that are not profitable. So you have to look at every single driver of the business and think about, how do I increase margin here? How do I increase gross margin? How do I bring down CAC? How do I bring down marketing spend? How do I increase organic marketing? What's top line this month and this quarter? But also importantly, what's bottom line? At what point am I break even? At what point am I profitable? Like, if you don't have those numbers readily available to you and the answers to those questions, if you can't answer those questions confidently, I think you're in trouble. And that's really been the North Star for our company from day one. And I, again, would have to sort of thank those, like, just business fundamentals that were taught very early on, and to not get sucked into the VC game. Because I see what's happening to a lot of consumer companies now, not just my peers, but others, even in the consumer e-commerce D2C world, is so many of them that were building and growing at the time of the pandemic. I mean, consumer funding is down 90% over the last 12 months. And no venture capital company wants to back or pour money into a balance sheet that's a net loss, regardless of how strong top line is. And so I think always thinking through those fundamentals and giving yourself optionality. Optionality is the name of the game. Survival is the name of the game. So, can you grow really aggressively? But more importantly, if you never raise a dime of venture capital funding again, can you continue to run this business? And if you can't answer yes, I think you're in trouble.
Which metrics do you track regularly? You mentioned a few already, CAC and others. So
Yeah.
how often do you track them? How do you keep your team accountable, and which ones?
Yeah, I love this question. So there's a few metrics that I track internally that are deeply important to me. One is gross revenue, net revenue. I also look at COGS, cost of inventory, shipping, as an individual percentage, but then also as a percentage of net sales. I look at ads and marketing. What is that in terms of just, dollar amount, but also as a percentage of, like, how much of that is driving X percentage of revenue? What are ROAS? What is the spend across the channels? What's the conversion across the channels? And what channels are scaling profitably and what channels are not? What campaigns are scaling profitably? What campaigns are not? And then we double down on the ones that are working and we pull the ones that are not. I would say those are the big ones. And then I also look at contribution margin. That's another metric I've been tracking very closely since day one, and having positive contribution margin and being able to have contribution margin expansion. I would say those are the key ones that I track. How often I track them? I have a weekly call with our CFO every Wednesday. We have a 1-hour meeting and we open the P&L and the balance sheet. And maybe there are some founders that do it. For me, it sort of just became good habits. I think having good habits early on, that compounds. And I can see and feel sort of the net benefits of that over the last 2 years. And then in terms of the team, what I really do is I try to give one person in the team a metric to own and to really run. And so if everybody has a metric that they're moving on the team, I think they can take full accountability for it. And I also give them access to the P&L and the balance sheet. So we remove, like, salaries from those numbers, but every other number is in there and everybody has
So
access to
I
our,
like that.
our
How
P&L.
does this work? Could you please give us an example?
Yeah, great. So for example, we have someone on our team that's in charge of inventory and merchandising and partnerships. And so that person is solely responsible for the COGS metric. So cost of goods, cost of inventory, and as part of COGS, like pick, pack, ship is also really important. And the pick, pack, ship line is something that him and I work really closely together on because it is very operational heavy. But the COGS metric is the metric that he moves. And the way I like to sort of give it to the team and make it really achievable is I don't say this metric needs to come down by 5% by the end of the 30 days. So my CFO teases me. She calls me the 1% harvester. That's a nickname that we now have in the team. We've actually joked that we should start creating merchandise at Kidsy saying the 1% harvesters. But I always tell every member of the team, I need you to move this metric down by 1%. Give me a 1% saving on this metric. Again, it's about building good habits that compound over time. And it feels like such an achievable target. So say hypothetically, if your COGS is 20%, by next month, let's bring it down to 19. So in the next 30 days, and you'll see that when you give people very achievable targets and metrics that they can really own and move, it happens. And 1%, 1%, 1% every month, by the end of the quarter, you're down 3% right there.
I love, talking about productivity. I love reading books about building habits. I love all of that. And I have implemented I don't like the word framework per se, but let's say a process in my agency to build 90-day roadmaps or quarterly plans for our clients, which are, brands. And the biggest challenge typically, not for us, but for everyone, I think based on everything I have learned so far about this, is not defining a goal. You can define a goal. And if it's an achievable goal or not, it's something else, but you can define a goal. The thing is, that's the output, right? The thing is, how do you properly define the inputs? And how do you hold your team and yourself accountable every single day, every single week, and every single month to be on track for those goals? And that's probably the biggest, issue for everyone, for going on a diet, to have the accountability for the eating right, working out, doing the reps. So how do you manage that internally?
I love this question. So the way I look at it, especially for the leadership team at Kidsy, is I am there just to be a compass. I am not your step-by-step Google Map direction. Turn left here, turn right here, move forward 200 feet, move back 200 feet. Now I'm not doing that. The goals that we give are very clear, and then we give clear timelines around what that goal is, whether it's moving a metric, whether it's securing a partnership, whether it's solving for X pain point operationally or logistically on a supply chain basis. It's very clear what that end goal is, and then I give them some time to achieve it. So whether it's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, they're project-based, goal-based tasks that need to be done. And I sort of just see myself as the compass. I will help you and guide you in that direction, but I think so much about also creating leaders within the team and giving them leadership skills is allowing them to define what are the inputs and processes that go into it. I trust the people that I hire and that I bring on, and they're all phenomenal and they all do a phenomenal job. But I understand that everyone has their own process of being able to do things. And I need to trust their process as much as they need to trust sort of my goals and my vision and my directional, sort of the directional guidance I am giving them. And then for the company at large, I'm there all times to jump in and provide like strategic step-by-steps if ever they're stuck or if ever they need me, but I'm not there to micromanage. And I think that's sort of the way I operate. And it's worked really, really well. And also you get to allow people to really build their leadership skills and their leadership abilities and build sort of their workflows and their thought processes. And in allowing someone else to do it, you learn so much as a result. Because when you have the engineer and the merchandising person and the operations person and the partnerships person and the financial person guide the process, it's a huge learning curve for you as a CEO. Oh, here's a way I never thought it could be done. Here's a great outcome. This is leading to a faster result. here's a bottleneck. If there's a bottleneck, I'll jump in and help you solve it. Or we'll get on a team call and let everybody pitch in and solve it. But just creating some sort of autonomy in the workflow, I think, is so important.
Your top or the biggest growth channels currently? And did that evolve over time?
For marketing, are you specifically asking about
Yes,
marketing
sorry,
channels?
marketing channels.
Hmm. So marketing for us has been a number of channels: Meta, Google. What I find about our customers, it's not just about running Google ads, but having very strong SEO, because the way our customer is that they're very intentional in their search. So there's a lot of intentionality when they're searching a product. They're either searching by brand or they're searching by a particular product function that they really need. Like, so I can give you an example. So when we have parents that are shopping on Kidsy, they already know, like, these people are very well researched. Parents aren't coming on your platform to experience some sort of like serendipitous like shopping experience the way maybe you would if you were buying clothes or shoes or accessories. They're very clear on what it is that they want, what they like, what the function is, and then they're searching for that. So having strong SEO has been very helpful to us. We're also the first re-commerce or off-price company in North America, so US and Canada, that advertises on TikTok Shop. None of our competitors do it. None of the big legacy players do it either. That's the reason is because children and baby products is a restricted category on TikTok. It's treated the same way as insurance or biotech or healthcare or medical products. So there were a lot of hoops and hurdles we had to jump over in order to unlock that growth engine for us, but we were able to do it last year. So TikTok is another really great outlet for us. And then I'm also really big on media and PR.
Of course.
I come from that background. I know the value. Yep. So you just have to lean into your superpowers. And Kidsy has been featured on the biggest media and news platforms around the world. And for a company that's only 18 months old, to be featured on TechCrunch, CNBC, CBS News, Wall Street Journal, Modern Retail, Bloomberg Television, I mean, the list goes on and on and on, is endless. And I have a full pipeline of all the media and PR we have going for us for the remainder of the year. We also launched a podcast a month
Nice.
ago. So bringing on a lot of influencers in the space to come on the podcast and give their tips and tricks has also driven a lot of organic. And then word of mouth is such a powerful engine. I think if you give one customer a phenomenal experience, especially if it's a parent, they shout about you from the rooftops to everybody else. An ambassador program on Kidsy. So we encourage, there's a lot of moms that are stay-at-home moms or moms that are on these like really long maternity leaves when they're having their kids and looking for perhaps ways to supplement or boost their income. So we have an ambassador program where if they share Kidsy and there's a sale made, they get some of the revenue share as well.
Amazing. I mean, I have so many questions that I can think of already, but I'll start by, TikTok Shop, because even though it's been released, I think over a year ago, like, let's say to the masses, as you said, there aren't many big players there for some reason or well-known brands. I follow some influencers in the space and they all say, like, look at the top 10, top 50, top 100, sellers. Nobody knows them and they are killing it. So I guess that there could be, of course, many reasons why that's happening. But for you, in your experience, what was it like? Like, what was the process to start selling there? Was it easy to see some kind of early results? And what was your strategy for that to happen?
Yeah. So to answer your question, for our category in particular, it's restricted. So you need to provide a lot of certifications in order to unlock that, which we were able to procure and acquire and do that in order to unlock that. We also worked very closely with the TikTok managers and account teams to guide us through that process. And I think becoming friends and friendly with the people that you want to work with is really, really helpful. Like understanding what are they looking for? What do they want you to do? What their needs are? I think so many founders, and I don't blame them for this because time is your biggest enemy. You only have so many hours in a day and so many resources, and you need to unlock like a gazillion things and get it done. And you're oftentimes with a small team. I understand that so much of it is like, I want, but you never stop for a second and ask like, what do you want? And I think asking what do you want and what do you need is so important in like the strategic relationship building questions. And so we started building a relationship with TikTok months after we launched, even though we only unlocked TikTok Shop a year later. And I think that has really served us well. So if there's any like, founders early in their journey listening, see what you can give first before making the ask. And this is the policy we have company wide, even across all our partners, no matter how big or small, whether it's on the media side, retail side, partnership side, supply side, doesn't matter. Ask what you can give first, not what you can get first. It moved the needle for us very quickly. So just in the first 2 months, TikTok started accounting for 20% of our monthly sales. So it's been a really powerful engine. We have not transparently invested a lot into the TikTok channel because, as I'm sure everybody is aware, Donald Trump tried to ban TikTok in January of this year, and there was so much uncertainty about whether or not this channel was going to live or whether the access was going to be pulled in the U.S. And again, I think because it's such a politically charged and unstable area, I think as a business, it makes sense to not invest in something where like the political ground is still super shaky. So I think once there's more clarity on if there is a buyer for TikTok in the United States or who that buyer is, if there's going to be any sort of acquisition or merger with TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, I think it will give us the confidence to continue to invest in that platform. For now, we've sort of pulled back our investment. We are still active. We do still pour money into it, but we're a little bit more reticent to do so.
I mean, it was crazy what happened keeps happening. So what was your strategy to grow there? Did you partner with influencers in the space, or because, many people say that what works typically and generates sales, regardless of the quality of your content, is the content that influencers post on your behalf, right? But I have talked to some brands that have experienced the opposite. What works best is their own content. It's not what I hear the most, but I have heard that recently. So in your case, what was your experience with that?
Yeah, so we tried both. So we did the TikTok influencer partnership and we did UGC in terms of like content creation. And I would say it didn't move the needle for us in a huge way, not at least the way I expected it to. What has really moved the needle for us has been our own organic content. Now, there is a caveat to all of this, which is Kidsy has the monopoly on TikTok Shop right now. So we are the only off-price re-commerce company in the United States and in Canada that has baby and kids products available for sale on TikTok Shop. None of our competitors have it. None of the legacy brands have it. Even the biggest players like TJ Maxx or Ross Stores or Burlington, these are companies that are $100 billion, $30 billion, $12 billion respectively market cap that still don't have this unlock on TikTok Shop. So I think we're very much sort of enjoying the monopoly of it. And if it means that we can just do the organic route on TikTok and continue to generate sales, which is what we have done. Like I said, it was accounting for 20% of our monthly revenue since we've launched it. I think that's been our strategy. And then, of course, as and when other competitors move into it, and if they're able to unlock it, then we can start looking at perhaps more influencer partnerships to kind of cut through the noise and the ad spend. But for now, it's been all organic.
Curious about is how easy or how hard it is for you to communicate what you guys offer to your customers, the main, value propositions.
Really easy. In a nutshell, we've been often called the TJ Maxx of the parenting world. And I think so many customers, we only sell in the United States for now. And so every customer has heard of this name, knows what this name means. And so to be able to be in the same breath as a company that has absolutely dominated the off-price discount market is, I think, a huge honor and something we look to certainly embrace and embody. Having said that, it's really easy to communicate the value and the value proposition of Kidsy because on the one hand, we are discount. And so people always know that if they're looking for a deal and if they're looking to save money and for cost savings, they come on our platform. And on the other side, we're also very sustainable driven. For the longest time, for decades, the word discount was seen as this like dirty D-letter word, which was never associated with sustainability because so much of discount you would, conjure up images of waste and burning and pollution. And it was always tied to fast fashion. And you think of like H&M and Zara and Shein and Temu. But I think what's really nice is we're really reinventing the word discount on Kidsy, where today when you shop discount, it has all these positive environmental effects. You are shopping sustainably. You are lowering your carbon footprint. You are diverting this product from landfill, from incinerators, from trash. And to be able to find something that's cheap and cheaper than anywhere else, yet still have this like really joyful, feel good shopping experience at the end of it is so rare. And so I think that's something that really is like the little magical potion of Kidsy.
One of the last questions I have for you is about AI. I cannot avoid asking founders coming on the pod about, whether they are using it somehow internally or, consumer facing. So are you doing anything with in that space, let's say?
Yes. So we do use a lot of AI tools internally and also for our customers. So really quick, like the three ones that we do use is number one, we have a customer chat bot that's available 24/7 to our customers, and the AI algorithm gets trained on a daily basis. And so even though we don't have a live customer agent available at the time, specifically offline hours after 6 p.m. Central Standard Time all the way to 8 a.m. the next morning, the AI chatbot is able to give you answers in real times, especially to frequently asked questions that we've already trained it and fed the data to it. And that's number one. Number two is we also have, it's completely proprietary, but we have a SKU matching system that we've been building internally, which allows us to detect and find like what the fastest moving SKUs are in the country. And that's a combination of artificial intelligence, but it's also a lot of machine learning. And so that's something that we do. And then we also have a pricing algorithm that is, again, a combination of AI and ML. So those are the tools that we use. And I think for us, like AI is such a buzzword. I think it's important. There's like I use ChatGPT every single day. That's like my go-to app. I love it. It's really quick at giving me questions. I even plug like mathematical formulas into ChatGPT and I have it sort of run numbers for me. I even have it explain like drivers and movers on our P&L and our balance sheet. So something historically that I might call my CFO for, I now just have ChatGPT explain it to me, like if this were to move this, or if this were to compound, or if this were to decrease, what does the end result, like net result, look like? So I rely on it a lot for like mathematical computations, but also just for industry knowledge. The way I look at sort of the way AI is today, and for us, I think every era of tech and every era of company building has always had these like hype cycles, right? And you look at like the early 2000s and it was all about marketplaces, and peer-to-peer marketplaces were the really big, really the sort of the big juggernauts. And then at some point it became the gig economy absolutely blew up. Then it was SaaS companies and subscription. And then, during the pandemic, it was everything that was like pandemic related. So everything was like telehealth or remote learning or telelearning or productivity tools for remote teams. And so I think we do go through these like hype cycles. And right now we are in an AI hype cycle. Do I think that the companies and the tools that are being built today are useful? 100%. Do I think that there is an unreasonable, enormous amounts of like valuation? I mean, we haven't yet seen the full life cycle for it. Like you'll only get to see it 6-7 years out, which are the ones that survive versus the ones that die. But I think the benefit of going through a hype cycle is it always sort of pulls the winners at the top very quickly. And so you take from it and you apply sort of whatever applications you think are useful to your company. But I think it's so important to not get sucked into the hype.
Yeah. I mean, my LinkedIn feed is flooded with AI content, AI gurus, AI ways of creating creatives, processes, emails, whatever, And as you said, it's important to know, to distinguish, there's a book on this, the signal from the noise, so
Mm.
I think, yeah, there's a lot of noise these days with that. I personally use AI, and I have heard, companies use AI for similar stuff. The tools you mentioned for internal use, I think there was some advanced things, the ones for predicting fast moving SKUs and stuff. I never heard that. That's great. But yeah, client customer facing, some people are training AI agents or bots, on their websites to answer questions that otherwise would have required a person before. If you sell, I don't know, air conditioners, how many watts or what's the size of these? Or you can answer questions that probably would have taken, some human interaction, and that's accelerating purchases. Now, Shopify has incorporated more features within their Sidekick, the AI agent, that are pretty cool right now. It gives you information that it didn't give you before. You can prompt Sidekick as you prompt, ChatGPT with really complex stuff, and it'll give it to you. And it's pretty cool because it's, Shopify based data. And that's pretty cool too.
Yeah, there's so many wonderful applications and tools that are coming out. And I think the most important thing is it's how do you look at how this will boost your output and boost your productivity, and how this will maybe decrease some of the manual tasks and the repetitive tasks that you and your team are doing. I never look at it as a function to replace anyone or anything on the team, but just as one more tool in your toolkit that you can deploy in order to boost productivity and also increase perhaps like healthier or stronger
Yeah,
outputs.
100%. Shraysi, I want to thank you for your time. This was a very interesting conversation. And before you go, I want to ask you one more question that I always like asking my guests before they leave. And it's only if you have a book that comes to mind that you love and you would like to share with the audience.
I think one book that's really relevant, which I still read till today, even though my company's not in the MVP phase, is The Lean Startup by Eric Weiss. And I think the reason why I love that book, even now, I mean, we just raised our seed round a couple of months ago, and it's something I still read till today because I think the fundamental principles of constantly thinking about your organization from a lean principles method is so important. One of the things that I think hate is when people celebrate or ask, like, as a measure for a company's success, like, how big is your team? And all of a sudden, if you're saying 50 or 100 people, it's some like signal for success in a company. Actually, think about it the other way. I think you always look at it as like, what is your revenue like per employee as a really healthy metric. And if you can have like fewer employees and it's a higher revenue number, that to me is like a much greater strength. And so, yeah, I think the book sort of really brings you back to the fundamentals. But more than a book, I would say, two newsletters I read a lot is I signed up to Warren Buffett's newsletter, especially his annual shareholders letters that he puts out. And I think I would recommend everyone to read that because it goes beyond his learnings at Berkshire Hathaway, but he talks about his investment principles and business principles as a whole, which I think is incredibly valuable. Charlie Munger also, when he was alive, would put out essays and newsletters from time to time, which I think are incredibly valuable. My favorite one is Charlie Munger wrote an essay called Worldly Wisdoms. I think it's, if you Google Charlie Munger Worldly Wisdoms, you'll see the full essay. It is a phenomenal read and an essay I've read a few times, which again, I would urge every founder, VC person to do. The principles that you can apply in your everyday life as it pertains to business building. And then a podcast I listen to on a daily or weekly basis anytime I'm driving is How I Built This by Guy Raz.
Yeah, I know it. It's amazing. Again, thank you for sharing those recommendations. For anyone listening or watching this, why not? First off, thank you. And second, if you go to the DTCinsider.com and find the episodes, you will see the show notes, including, of course, the book, the podcast, and the newsletter, and the essay as well. We'll put it all there. So one more thing that we'll put in there is where to find you, Shraysi. Where can they go to find more about you and Kidsy?
At this point in my life, I would say, most active on LinkedIn. It's about the only social platform I use on a relatively frequent basis. So you can write to me on LinkedIn. And then if you would like to follow us on Kidsy, we're on Instagram and Facebook at Shop Kidsy. And then our website is kidsy.com.
We'll make sure to include those links as well. Shraysi, once again, thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Brian. This was fun.
This episode was brought to you by BSR Digital. We help DTC brands grow through paid ads and email marketing campaigns. If you'd like us to help your business grow, head on over to bsrdigital.com and schedule a call with us.